Yo, everybody remembers Minato as the perfect hero, but like almost nobody sees the dark truth behind all that. He wasn't destroyed by some enemy, he got broken by the very duty he carried alone, no cap. Because real talk, being the yellow flash never actually defined him, but that silent weight that came with it? That's what really mattered, dude. Look, if you're into understanding the psychological side that nobody talks about in these characters, go ahead and drop that like and hit subscribe. It seriously helps push this type of content out here, for real. Alright, so check it out. Minato always carried this pressure that nobody could actually see, you know what I'm saying? Like, destiny straight up dumped the responsibility of protecting everyone on his shoulders, and that shaped a wound inside him that he never had the time to actually face, bro. It's hella deep when you think about it. He believed his entire value came from what he was capable of saving, and that failing wasn't even an option, not even as a human being, dude. Like, imagine living with that weight every single day. That's not normal. That's not healthy. That's the kind of expectation that messes you up from the inside out. This type of expectation doesn't build a hero, man. It builds someone who learns to suffocate their own pain just to keep the entire world standing. And that's exactly what happened to Minato. He became so good at hiding his struggles that people started thinking he didn't have any. They saw the legend, the prodigy, the genius ninja who never missed a beat, but they didn't see the kid who was terrified of letting everyone down. See, from a psychological standpoint, this is what we call emotional suppression on a massive scale. Minato developed this coping mechanism where he couldn't allow himself to feel his own fear, his own anxiety, his own doubts. Because the moment he did, that's the moment everything could fall apart. So he locked it all away, buried it deep, and kept moving forward like nothing was wrong. But here's the thing, that stuff doesn't just disappear, bro. It builds up. It festers. It grows into something darker, something heavier. And for Minato, every mission, every battle, every person he saved just added another layer to that burden. He was running on empty, trying to be everything for everyone while slowly losing himself in the process. And nobody noticed. Not his sensei, not his teammates, not even Kushina at first. Because Minato was just that good at hiding it. He smiled when he needed to smile. He stayed calm when everyone else was losing it. He became the person everyone could rely on. But who was he supposed to rely on? Who was carrying him when he couldn't carry himself anymore? That's the tragedy nobody talks about. Minato wasn't just a hero who died protecting his village. He was someone who spent his entire life convinced that his worth was measured by what he could do for others, never by who he actually was as a person. And that belief? That's what started breaking him long before that night with the Nine Tails, dude. The cracks were already there. They'd been forming for years. People just couldn't see them because Minato wouldn't let them. This is what happens when duty becomes your identity. When being strong becomes the only version of yourself you're allowed to show. When vulnerability feels like weakness and weakness feels like failure. Minato lived in that prison every single day, and it destroyed him from the inside out way before any enemy ever could. Real talk, that's the dark truth everyone misses when they talk about the fourth Hokage. They see the sacrifice, but they don't see the suffering that came before it. The quiet, invisible kind that no one ever acknowledges because it doesn't look dramatic enough from the outside. So here's where it gets really heavy, dude. That calmness Minato had? That wasn't peace. That was the mask he created so nobody would notice the constant fear of not being enough, for real. Like, people looked at him and saw this composed, collected ninja who had everything under control, but that was literally just a facade, bro. It was armor. Emotional armor that he wore every single day to protect himself from being seen as weak or incapable. That gentle smile, that controlled posture, that steady look in his eyes. Those were just ways of hiding the emptiness that was growing inside him every time duty spoke louder than his own humanity. And the crazy part? He got so good at it that even he started believing the mask was real. He convinced himself that this was just who he was supposed to be. The person who never breaks, who never falters, who never shows cracks. But yo, from a psychological perspective, this is textbook emotional dissociation. Minato essentially split himself into two people. The version everyone needed him to be, and the version that was slowly dying inside. And he prioritized the first one so hard that the second one just withered away, man. Like, he became so disconnected from his own emotional needs that he genuinely didn't know how to process them anymore. Minato never had permission to fall apart. And that's what started breaking him. A weight that increased every single day until there was no turning back. Think about it, bro. Every mission where he had to be perfect. Every moment where people looked to him for answers. Every battle where one mistake could cost lives. That pressure doesn't just stay external. It seeps into your bones. It becomes part of your nervous system. It rewires your brain to constantly be in survival mode, always anticipating the next crisis, never allowing yourself to actually rest. And here's what's really messed up: society celebrated that about him. People praised Minato for being so reliable, so steady, so unshakable. But what they were actually praising was his ability to self-destruct quietly without bothering anyone with his pain. They loved the hero, but they never saw the human being suffocating underneath all those expectations. This is the duty that broke him straight up. Not the duty itself, necessarily, but the way it forced him to abandon every part of himself that wasn't useful for protecting others. His dreams? Didn't matter. His fears? Had to be hidden. His need for support? Couldn't exist because he was supposed to be the one providing support. Minato became a function instead of a person, and that's psychological violence on the deepest level, dude. Like, imagine being in a constant state of hypervigilance where you can never let your guard down because people are depending on you. That's chronic stress. That's anxiety that never gets resolved because there's always another threat, always another mission, always another person to save. And the body can't sustain that forever, bro. Neither can the mind. Something has to give eventually. For Minato, what gave was his sense of self. He stopped knowing who he was outside of his role. His identity became so intertwined with being the protector, the hero, the fourth Hokage, that he literally couldn't separate Minato the person from Minato the symbol. And when you lose that distinction, when you can't tell where the duty ends and you begin, that's when the collapse starts, man. That's when everything inside you starts crumbling because there's nothing left to hold on to except the role you're playing. And the worst part? Nobody could save him from this because nobody even knew it was happening. Minato made sure of that. He wore that mask so convincingly that people thought he was genuinely okay. They thought he was just naturally that strong, that resilient. But strength that comes from suppressing everything you feel isn't real strength, bro. It's a ticking time bomb. It's borrowed time. And Minato was living on borrowed time for way longer than anyone realized. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was gradual, invisible, happening in the quiet moments when he was alone and the mask could slip just a little. In those brief seconds where he'd feel the weight of everything pressing down on him and wonder how much longer he could keep going. But then morning would come and he'd put the mask back on and the cycle would continue. Over and over. Day after day. Until there was nothing left of him except the duty itself. That's the connection to the title right there. The duty that broke him wasn't just a responsibility. It was a slow, methodical erasure of his humanity, piece by piece, until the person underneath the legend just ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Wild stuff, man. Yo, before we keep going, drop in the comments which part of Minato's journey hits you the hardest emotionally. Seriously, it helps me bring even deeper analysis like this for real. Alright, so deep down, Minato didn't want to carry the world on his shoulders, bro. He just never had another choice, you feel me? Like, from the moment he showed exceptional talent as a kid, that path was set for him. People saw his potential and immediately decided what his life was going to be about. Nobody asked him what he wanted. Nobody gave him space to figure out who he could be outside of being useful to the village. His destiny was written before he even had a chance to write it himself, and that's hella tragic when you really sit with it. And every decision, every sacrifice, every single night that he spent carrying the fear of losing everything, it cost him parts of himself that nobody ever saw, dude. Like, we're talking about pieces of his soul that just got chipped away bit by bit. His ability to feel joy without guilt? Gone. His capacity to rest without anxiety? Erased. His hope that maybe one day he could just exist without the weight of everyone's survival on his back? Destroyed, man. Completely destroyed. From a psychological standpoint, what Minato experienced is what we call chronic self-abandonment paired with complex trauma. He was in a constant state of sacrificing his own needs for the collective good, and over time, that creates this internal void where your sense of self used to be. You become so practiced at ignoring your own emotions, your own limits, your own humanity, that you literally forget what it feels like to prioritize yourself. And for someone like Minato who started this pattern young, by the time he became Hokage, there was barely anything left of the person he might have been if he'd had the freedom to choose differently. The truth is that the duty that made him a symbol was the exact same thing that destroyed his human side, slowly, silently, like a poison that nobody could see working its way through his system. People saw the yellow flash blitzing through battlefields, saving lives, turning the tide of wars. But they didn't see the nights where he couldn't sleep because the faces of everyone he couldn't save haunted him. They didn't see the moments where he questioned if any of it mattered, if he was making a real difference or just delaying the inevitable. They didn't see how exhausted he was, not physically, but existentially exhausted from carrying a burden that was never meant for one person to bear. And here's what really gets me, bro. Minato internalized this idea that his life had less value than the lives he protected. Like, somewhere along the way he started believing that his purpose was to be a shield, a sacrifice, a tool for the greater good. And when you adopt that mindset, when you genuinely believe your life only matters in relation to how useful you are to others, that's when the depression really sets in, man. That's when the anxiety becomes inescapable because you're constantly terrified that you'll fail to be useful. And if you're not useful, then what even are you? This is the reality nobody wants to talk about when they glorify self-sacrifice. Yeah, Minato's sacrifice was heroic. Yeah, he saved Konoha. But at what cost to him as a person? At what cost to his mental health, his emotional well-being, his right to exist as more than just a weapon for the village to use? Nobody asks those questions because it's uncomfortable. It's easier to remember him as the legend and forget that legends are built on the suffering of real people who never got the chance to be anything else. Minato didn't die for Konoha, real talk. He died trying to protect something he never managed to protect inside himself. His own humanity, his own worth beyond what he could do for others, his own right to be seen as a complete person with needs and fears and limits. And that's the deepest wound of all, dude. The fact that he spent his entire life fighting for everyone else's right to live freely while he himself was trapped in a prison of expectations that he couldn't escape from. Like, think about the Ninetales attack for a second. Yeah, it was a crisis. Yeah, desperate measures were needed. But why did it have to be him? Why did Minato immediately jump to, I'll seal half of it in myself and the other half in my newborn son? Because that's what he'd been conditioned to do his whole life. Sacrifice himself without hesitation, without considering that maybe, just maybe, he deserved to live too. He deserved to raise Naruto. He deserved to grow old with Kushina. He deserved to experience life beyond duty and death and endless, crushing responsibility. But he couldn't even imagine that as an option, bro. His brain was so wired for self-sacrifice that it didn't register as a choice anymore. It was just automatic, instinctive, the only response he knew. And that's what makes it so heartbreaking, man. Minato wasn't just killed by the Ninetales. He was killed by a lifetime of believing that his value was conditional, that his existence only mattered if he was saving someone, that being the hero meant never being allowed to be human. The anxiety he must have felt in those final moments, dude. Knowing he was leaving Naruto behind. Knowing his son would grow up without him. Knowing that all the protection he tried to provide was still incomplete, still imperfect, still not enough. That's the tragedy. Even in death, Minato couldn't escape the feeling that he'd failed somehow, that he hadn't done enough, that maybe if he'd been stronger or faster or better, things could have been different. And from a mental health perspective, that's the ultimate consequence of untreated anxiety and depression in someone who's been forced into a savior role. You never feel like enough. You never feel like you've done enough. The goalpost keeps moving because the standard is impossible. Perfection, constant vigilance, zero mistakes, infinite strength. Nobody can meet that standard, bro. Nobody. But Minato tried anyway and it cost him everything. So yeah, the duty that made him a symbol was the same duty that broke him. It shaped him, defined him, and ultimately consumed him. And the saddest part? The world remembers the symbol. They remember the fourth Hokage, the hero who saved the village. But they don't remember the kid who never got to choose his own path. The young man who smiled through his pain because he didn't know how to do anything else. The father who wanted nothing more than to hold his son but had to let go before he ever really got the chance. That's Minato's real story, man. Not the legend. The person underneath it who was slowly destroyed by the weight of being legendary. And if that doesn't hit you in the feels, I don't know what will, for real. And yo, as heavy as Minato's burden seems, there's another character who carried an emotional weight that was even more cruel, and almost nobody realized how much it actually broke him too, bro. Like, we're talking about someone whose psychological suffering was so deeply buried, so expertly hidden, that even fans who think they understand his story completely miss the darkest layers of what he went through, no cap. The pain this character endured wasn't just about duty or sacrifice. It went way deeper than that, man. It was about identity erasure, about being forced to become something that went against every fiber of who he was, about carrying guilt so massive that it literally rewired his entire sense of self. And the worst part? He did it all while maintaining a facade that fooled everyone. Even the people closest to him never saw how destroyed he really was on the inside. In the next video we're diving into that story, and trust me, it gets even darker. We're talking about trauma that spans years, about choices that had no right answers, about a character who sacrificed more than his life. He sacrificed his entire existence as a person. The psychological breakdown is next level, and when you see how it all connects, how the system itself created the conditions for his suffering, man, it's gonna hit different, for real. So if this analysis got you thinking, if you're ready to go even deeper into the mental health aspects that nobody talks about in anime, make sure you're subscribed because that video is dropping soon. And honestly, after you hear that story, your whole perspective on what it means to suffer in silence is gonna change completely, dude. The darkness is just getting started. Let's keep going.